Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, or whatever the case may be. My name is Marcus, and I am the host of the Black Brazil Today YouTube channel, as well as the blackbraziltoday.com blog, where I analyze Brazil from the perspective of race. So today I want to focus on something that I've seen just improve over the last 2 decades, or even I'll just say the whole 23 years that I've been following the situation with Black Brazil, racial politics, the struggle for racial identity, equality, these types of things. When I first got into Brazil, this was I always say New Year's Eve, Christmas Eve of 1999. I bought this encyclopedia that spoke a lot about the situation with Black Brazilians, the Africana Encyclopedia of the African and African American Experience. And from there, I just as I brought in the year 2000, I remember buying a couple of books by the great Abdias do Nascimento. I always describe him as the Africana Encyclopedia describes him as the most complete African intellectual of the 20th century, which is an incredible accolade, an incredible compliment when you consider all of the intellectuals we've had over the years. That led me, the same bookstore, which was the Shrine of the Black Madonna. Back in the day, they had 3 locations in Detroit, Atlanta, and Houston. And the one in Detroit closed a few years ago, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure what year, but I used to always be in that bookstore. And that's where I got this encyclopedia. And I was just blown away by how much coverage, how much they introduced me to the struggle of Black Brazilians. I'm like, how did I not know all of this was going on in Brazil for all of this time? As I was a person who was intrigued by the experiences of Black people outside of the country I was born in, the United States. So from there, I bought a couple of books by, again, I mentioned Abdias do Nascimento. He was the only Black author that I found in that bookstore whose work was in English, because as I had just discovered Brazil, I didn't know how to speak Portuguese. I wasn't accustomed to Portuguese, so I was looking for all the material I could get that was in English. So about that time, the year 2000, and a couple of years before that, it was when the internet really started to take off. You just had, it was like just opening up the door to the world. And this coincided with my discovery of Brazil and, coming across all of this material that was already in English talking about the situation of Black Brazilians. So then that year, 2000, I decided, okay, I have to go to this country. There's so many intriguing things going on there that I had no idea. You live in the United States, the only Black Brazilian you knew about was Pelé, the great Pelé, who's considered one, if not but one of the greatest soccer players of all time. He died, I think, last December. It's coming up on a year since Pelé passed away. But Black Brazil is much deeper than just Pelé, particularly when you're looking at the racial discussion. So with the explosion in the internet, I had, access to all of this new information about this country that I just became fascinated with, right? So then, as I started to look for more material, eventually I'm like, I got to find a way, because if I can learn how to speak Portuguese and read Portuguese, the amount of information I can get will just explode, probably, 100 times more than what I can just get in English, specifically about Black Brazil and the situation of Black Brazilians. So then sometime either before or after I made that first trip to Brazil in September of 2000, I met this young lady online who had, she had found a few of my writings online. And she says, I've been to Rio. I went to Rio a few years ago, and I brought back, have you ever heard of this magazine called Hassa Brazil? I'm like, no. I've told that story in a separate video. Hassa has been around for like 27 years, but it was the first time I saw a Brazilian magazine that featured predominantly Black people. And she says, well, I got 4 of them. I don't want them anymore. I sent them to you if you want. So she sent me these magazines, from New York, where she lived. And I saw these bright, shiny magazines. The closest thing I could compare them to was something like an Ebony or an Essence magazine that we had in the United States. And I was totally enamored seeing these beautiful Black faces on the covers of these magazines, flipping the pages, reading the stories, reading the best that I could, because I was just getting into learning Portuguese at the time. And when I saw those faces, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is it. I definitely have to visit this country, you know. Um, But that was my introduction to media that represented Black Brazilians. And at the time, Raça Brazil was really the only outlet that Black Brazilians had. The story goes that when Revista Raça came out in 1996, the first issue immediately sold out, like within, I don't know, like a week or something, because Black Brazilians were so starved to see representation. If you go to a magazine stand, they're all over Brazil, and you look at the magazine covers, all of those covers are going to just have white faces. you know, Brazil always has this false thing going where they say we're proud of our mixing, we're proud of the mixed race population we have, but it's like, okay, well, where are these black and brown faces on the covers of your magazines? They were invisible on TV except for, subservient roles, as I've talked about that in numerous videos and articles. You just didn't see much black presence in the audio visual or the print media. Okay. So Revista Raça, or Raça Brazil magazine, was a watershed moment because it showed that there was a public in Brazil that was looking for representation, something they could identify with. We've seen stories over the years where it says like 90 some percent of particularly Black Brazilians don't see themselves in the media. They don't see themselves in the print media or the audio visual, in terms of television and film. So it was a huge opportunity for anybody who wanted to get into the media business that was focused specifically on Afro-Brazilians, right? But Raça Brazil was not the first magazine, attempt at black oriented media. Uh, Black oriented media in Brazil goes all the way back to at least the 1930s, if not before that. But from what I'm aware of, it started with newspapers that specifically spoke on the situation of Black Brazil. O Homem de Cor, which means the man of color. Another magazine, another newspaper called O Menelik, O Clarim, Alvorado. One of those particular newspapers was like the print representation of what was called the Frente Negra Brasileira. It was one of the first big black organizations that represented the struggle for equal rights for Black Brazilians, right? Then you had the newspaper called Quilombo. This comes out of the aforementioned Abadias do Nascimento. Some years ago, when I was in Rio, I think I bought somebody, I don't know who did this, but they recreated the Quilombo newspaper and put it all in one reprint in one like really large book form, and they just put all the issues of the Quilombo. They I don't know, it's like they scanned it, the copies that they had, and put it all in one book. It's like, I don't know, 2004, maybe 2005, 7, somewhere in there. I don't remember, but they reissued it. This magazine, this newspaper that was from the 1950s. So Black Brazil has had a long history of the black press, you could say. The internet just opened up the door for more journalists speaking from the Afro-Brazilian perspective. So when I first started studying Brazil, I have to give a shout out. I have to mention these media platforms that don't even exist anymore. When I first started reading about Black Brazil, there were two particular websites that I checked out, maybe three. One was called Revista Afirma, that I haven't been able to find any material about them, about that magazine, that newspaper. But I have had contact with the young lady who was one of the editors of that online newspaper. It covered a lot of topics. I really appreciated that. I'm still looking for her name is Fernanda, and she told me, I had spoken to her about this some years ago. She said she didn't really have anything left, but that was in terms of the material that they posted on that website. Very important black press representation for Afro-Brazil. Then you had another one called Jornal Irohin. I followed that website religiously, and it talked about everything. It talked about culture, talked about politics, talked about racism. Don't know what happened to that. I really appreciated that particular website. I don't know why it went down. It was one of the best of its time. Also around that time, you had another website called Porto Afro. And there was another one that was called Mundo Negro. And I'm not sure, Mundo Negro, which means Black World, I'm not sure if that Mundo Negro from the early 2000s is by the same creator of the current version of Mundo Negro, because that original Mundo Negro disappeared for a few years. And then some years later, another website popped up called Mundo Negro. And I think it's a completely different website, you know. But these are some of the most important first steps in Black journalism that would start on, when with the rise of the internet. Okay. Another good one was Afro Press. I've met Doji Val of Vieira some years ago. It's actually, we had kind of I'm not going to get into that. We had kind of a thing that happened at this event that he participated in some years ago. I don't think we ever straightened that out. And then on the print side, there was a magazine, I think in the 80s or 90s, it was called Revista Ebony, which means, Ebony Magazine. In essence, I'm quite sure that magazine was influenced by the American Ebony Magazine. You had another magazine called 100% Negro, means 100% Black. Of all of these media outlets, Raça Brazil is the one that lasted the longest. Most of the attempts at print media for Black Brazil disappeared, went out of business some years ago. Raça Brazil has gone through changes over the 27 years of its history, but it's still out there. It's now on Instagram. They still present they still issue the colorful magazine that you can find on newsstands. So Raça Brazil was a watershed moment for Black media in Brazil. But from there, I think that other media outlets that are online have actually surpassed Revista Raça. Some of the websites that I follow today include, again, the aforementioned Mundo Negro. The Guedes Institute for Black Women has been a leader in this endeavor, presenting not only just Black Brazil in general, but specifically Black women's issues. What else is there? From there is just a whole lot of different websites that have come up in following behind the footsteps by Raça Brazil. I like websites like Todos Negros do Mundo. There is Alma Preta, which means Black Soul. You have Noticia Preta, which means Black News. And these are two of the main, besides Mundo Negro, these are, I would say, maybe the three top Black Brazil media outlets online these days. I read these websites every day. So today, what I'm going to be talking about is how Black journalists challenge the racist approach of news reporting by Brazil's traditional media. And this is important because when you look, you just see there's a certain slant with Brazil's mainstream media. And it's like, in order to offset that a little, you need a Black media that tells the perspective of the Black Brazilian population. Because people have complained for years about the racist tendencies of Brazil's top 3 or top 4 television networks, particularly Global, Rede Record, SBT, and Banges. So what other alternative do you have but to create your own? That's what the saying always goes. Over the years, we've seen a number of people pop up on YouTube who have grown sufficiently, who have grown by leaps and bounds, getting large followings to present this Black perspective. Video producers, look at this article right here. Video producers filling the gap of Black representation in the media. YouTube Black Brazil event at Google building in Sao Paulo features 2 popular content creators or producers. Books, that's another area that we're starting to see more Black Brazilians being able to release books about Black Brazilians by Black Brazilians, because as often as I would frequent Brazilian bookstores, you just didn't see many books about or written by Black Brazilians. In fact, I would argue that sometimes you saw more books about Black people being books that were released in the United States by Americans, and then they would just have the English title translated into Portuguese. Again, these things are slowly starting to change. In Ennegrecindo, or blackening YouTube, doing what TV has never done, Afro-Brazilians use the internet for a Black representation that the media pretends doesn't exist. With Black representation lacking in the Brazilian media, actors bring their perspective to YouTube. Media for the diaspora. This is a story I was talking about, how with the absence of Black cast, Black directors, and Black actors, or just very minimum representation of the Black perspective in the media, or in television shows or novellas, soap operas, they turn to American productions that feature mostly Black cast, and these shows exploded in Brazil. Everybody Hates Chris, That's So Raven, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, My Wife and Kids. All of those shows were big hits in Brazil. So it just shows again that people identify with these images. They identify, like, why can't we have Black Brazilian representation the way that they have in the United States? Again, Brazilians have always pointed to the United States as the most racist country in the world, but yet Black Brazilians, if they want to see Black faces on TV, they got to turn to the American product. Okay. When they are on TV, they present stereotypes, Black bandits, and how Brazil's media continues to perpetuate the racist image of Black criminals. These are all articles that you can find on the blog. Afro-Brazilian actresses and filmmakers criticize the gap in representation. It's very complex, the situation of a white person telling the story of a Black without being in his place, the absence of Black representation behind the cameras. It just goes on and on. This is stuff that I've been talking about for years. And I'm saying I'm seeing a shift now. The rise of the internet and independent productions is pushing some of the more mainstream media outlets in Brazil to address this issue of the underrepresentation of Black people, both in front of the camera and behind the camera. Which brings me to the point, which brings me to the article today. Again, Black journalists challenge the racist approach of news reporting by Brazil's traditional media. So I want to talk about some of these outlets. There's going to be two main creators of two of the top Black-oriented websites in Brazil that I'm going to be talking about in this material today. Okay, so these are some of the people at the Alma Preta website, some of the content creators at that website, one of the most important websites of Black Brazil. Today's article is by Rafael Cardoso of the Agência Brasil website. So during the 19th century, a part of the Black population understood that the press could be a tool in the struggle against racial discrimination. Specific channels were created to communicate struggles and demands of the time. Almost 2 centuries later, does it make sense to continue to have a Black press? The significant number of vehicles that currently identify and present themselves from this category are forceful answers to the question. Black communicators have increasingly claimed a place of protagonism and have reinforced the need to address the country's social problems from the racial structures that support them. The traditional press is criticized for not satisfactorily responding to these demands. From the point of view of content, white and Black people are treated differently in the articles. When analyzing the subjects who produce the information, Black professionals are still a minority in the newsroom. That's another topic that you can find an article about that on the Black Brazil Today blog. And when they rarely occupy decision-making posts. Examples of the Black press in the 21st century are not lacking, such as these are, websites that I've mentioned previously. The Gueladez website, Mundo Negro, Historia Preta, meaning Black history, Afro Press, Atlântico Negro, meaning the Black Atlantic, Revista Afirmativa, Nossos Passos Vêm de Longe, and Cucine or Cucine TV or TV. The guy behind that channel he's a legend. This is Dom Filó. He has been documenting Black history and culture in Brazil for at least since the 1970s. He has a YouTube channel as well. To understand a little of the perspective and the objectives of these most recent media, Agência Brasil interviewed the founders of two websites created less than 10 years ago and engaged in an anti-racist communication. The name of those websites are Alma Preta and Notícia Preta, both which I mentioned earlier. The first emerged in 2015 from a collective of Black students at the Universidade Estadual Paulista, which is called Unesp, and is led by the journalist Pedro Borges. The second was launched in 2018 by journalist Thais Bernardes. She already had experience in other traditional media companies and decided to invest in an editorial project to combat inequalities. On September 14th, we celebrated the 190th anniversary of the first newspaper of the Black press in Brazil. It was called O Mulato ou O Homem de Cor, meaning the mulatto or the man of color, which was created in September 14th of 1833. So what is that? That's a long time, 190 years. So this newspaper actually came out, what is that, like 55 years before actually the abolition of slavery in Brazil, Brazil being the last country in the Americas to abolish slavery. Are there well-defined differences between the Black press and the media considered more generalist? For the co-founder and director of Alma Preta, Pedro Borges, the discussion starts from the very principles of segmentation and universality. Borges Pedro, or Pedro Borges to the right. He's part of the Alma Preta website team. This looks like the well-known historian, Ana, I think her name is Ana Magalhães. I think that's her. That's who that looks like. When it's Black, it's considered segmented But who said that mainstream media is universal and not segmented? It's too little to fit outlets like ours into a niche journalism category. We use the same journalistic techniques as other colleagues, but the white and masculine subject sees itself in the place of universality and identifies the other with a racialized and segmented subject. These great communication channels privilege dialogue with a middle class and a white elite. So are they not too segmented? Asked Pedro. The difference in this sense would not be in the choice of topics and events to be covered by journalists, but in the perspective that is adopted in relation to them. Borges emphasizes that Alma Preta has a prominent look at groups of the periphery and the desire to communicate to transform reality. Now, when we speak on periphery, we're speaking on the outskirts of major cities where the population is the poor population and primarily Black and brown, a majority of these poor neighborhoods, right? I understand that the Black media today has also claimed a place of universality. Our coverage is far from being cut out in cases of racial discrimination. And so what he's saying is that they don't just focus on racial discrimination. If you look at these sites, even though they have a lot of material on specifically racism, the material you find on these websites, these Black-oriented websites these days, cover the gamut of things that Afro-Brazilians are interested in, full-rounded, history, culture, everyday politics, racial identity, just a plethora of topics that Black people are interested in, because that's been another battle cry. Like, why is it that Black people only have to talk about racism? This is something that people have talked about for a number of years as well. Continuing, he says, we cover agendas that are central to Brazil as a whole. And racism is an element that structures Brazilian society. Inequality in housing, health, public safety, food, the environment, all of them have racial inequality as a background. Therefore, it is up to the Black press to cover all of these issues, says Pedro Borges. According to Thais Bernardes, director and founder of Notícia Preta, again, meaning Black news, the traditional media has always been aligned with the interests of a white political and economic elite. Therefore, it reinforces and spreads racism by covering the facts of everyday life, especially when Black subjects are the focus of the news. Historically, where did Blacks appear in the 19th century newspaper? This is Thais Bernardes talking. Where did they appear in the 19th century newspaper? They were in the place of looking for a Black runaway slave or selling a slave. This is when they had newspapers, say in the 19th century. These are some of the top headlines you'll see on the front of these newspapers. Like, they're looking for a runaway slave, or we have a slave for sale. This is what you would see on the front pages of some of these newspapers. Today, this place is that of a general editor. What has changed about our bodies being sold in the early 19th century and our bodies dehumanized in current years? If you access the newspapers, the people are there as people on the margins of society. There is a newspaper cover in the 2000s with Black people tied to a pole, says Thais Bernardes. Now, I'm wondering if she's talking about this particular case. I don't remember what year it was, but I reported on it on a blog where this kid was he was tied to this pole by his neck by, I guess he was being accused of stealing things or whatever, and the white residents of the neighborhood, snatched him up and tied him to a pole with this, like a bicycle lock around his neck, and tied him to a pole. I wonder if that's what she's talking about. There's been a number of these type of stories over the years where they have Black people tied to a pole, Black people, tied to a bicycle structure, one of those things that you tie you lock your bicycle to in a public parking spot. And people argue like, they still treat Black Brazilians as if they're slaves. So I'm wondering if that's what she's talking about, because this comment didn't go much further, but that's what I think she might be referring to. When there is an operation inside of a favela, the traditional media will always start with, according to the police, this operation was done to combat such a thing. And what she's talking about there is the police will say, you have a huge police presence in some of the poor neighborhoods, poorly, mostly non-white populations. In Rio, they had the UPP, the pacifying police unit. And it's almost like a segregation going on there. You see people going on about their lives, and here you had the police stopping them and frisking them. They would have curfews. They would stop people from doing certain events in the community, and they felt like they were like being under like a, a I don't know, Jim Crow or something. They feel like what is this, apartheid? Why do you have the police set up in the primarily non-white, poor regions, and then you're treating people as if they're criminals in their own community? It's something that I've talked a lot about over the years, and they always use the context of we're fighting. This is the war on drugs. Right, we're trying to make the community safer, but yet when these police go up into these neighborhoods and they start shooting, it's usually the people who have nothing to do with crime that end up dead on the ground from some stray police bullet. So this is what she's talking about in this particular piece of the interview. It will always start from the institutional side. We come from the resident side of those who get hit by that. We can talk about the consequences of the police operation, the children who were left out of school, and the closed health posts. During anti-racist German, Doing anti-racist journalism is understanding who we are talking to, is doing nonviolent communication. This is what defines the lead, the name, the main part of the news, adds Thais. Another thing to throw in there is that whenever somebody gets struck down by a stray bullet, often coming from police, police will automatically say, "Oh, the bullet came from one of the drug dealers." They'll say that well, he was suspected of robbing something. They'll always justify the action for what took somebody's life in the favela when they take a shot from usually a police bullet, right? They'll take a shot, they go down, they die. There's been numerous people over the years who've died from stray police bullets who claim to be fighting crime, fighting drug dealers. And the other facet of that is that often when they talk to the community residents, they'll tell a different story from what the police tell. So this is why there is a need for alternative media, the media that tells another side of the story that is outside of the mainstream objective. So recent movements give the impression that more communications companies have been concerned with responding to social demands for greater racial diversity on their staff, whether through selection processes for hiring Black people, or in the case of media that work with video, putting more Black faces on the screens. But for both Thais and Pedro, these actions are still insufficient. I don't want representation. I want fairness, because representation means having a person there and that's it. Is the whole group represented that way? Are there Black people among directors and editors, or are they just in the news and in front of the television, which is the question. It's not just about who's in front of the camera. Who makes the decision of how to present people in front of the camera? These are decisions made behind the camera. We're going to change that narrative. We have to have independent media and at least a Black perspective from in front of the camera as well as behind the camera. What do we do? What do we change in the structure if we don't occupy places of power and decision making? Until that happens, we have the single Black syndrome, which justifies a discourse that the company is diverse, analyzes Thais. And speaking on that, there was a video that I did last week where, a popular Black actress was saying, "I'm tired of being the only Black person, in the cast of a novella or whatever." Right. So this is the same thing. She's saying, okay, we got a Black person there, so that's diversity. Actually, it's not. You choose the Black person, the only Black person, and then you choose how that Black person is presented. That is not diversity. Press channels aimed at the production of anti-racist content end up being more receptive spaces for Black professionals and allow them to occupy positions other than the subaltern or the subordinate. We have an objective and daily need in Brazil for the Black population to organize themselves to have a space where they can speak and be heard. To this day, we can identify a gigantic racial discrepancy in Brazilian newsrooms. Something else that I've talked about. I think there's a post on the blog about that. We still have a Brazilian press that in the general body is mostly white. And in the direction or the director's area, the people who are in control of these news platforms, it is even rarer to find someone Black. This happens in exceptional cases. The only places where this happens often are on Black media channels, says Pedro Borges. In early August, Alma Preta released an anti-racist writing manual. It brings a set of principles that should guide journalistic work based on the editorial experiences of the site. The idea is that it be read and serve as a reflection for communicators in general, regardless of whether they are linked to the vehicles of the Black press. This is Pedro Borges, the founder of Alma Preta. In a coverage, you have a diversity of views, of stages. We need to respect the people who have been victimized in certain processes. Whether it's a person who has been the target of police action, someone who has been evicted by a repossession order, or a victim of land grabbing and violence. Often journalism is limited to listening to the official source, and when it listens to other people, it becomes a footnote. Our work cannot be a public safety release. We need to listen and check all sides of the stories, argues Pedro Borges. During her studies in Brazil and Europe, Thais didn't take classes on Black press and journalism courses. She argues that it is essential to rescue this story and to present it to those who work today in the communication realm. In this sense, knowing that more than 190 years of struggles and initiatives of the Black press helps to situate the present itself. The profession gains even greater contours and missions. It is essential for the communicator to understand that our steps come from afar. Sometimes people tell me that my work is pioneering. No, the journalism I do is the journalism of Homem de Cor, Mulatto, Abdias do Nascimento. Again, these are some of the first newspapers for the Black population in Brazil. And of course, I already discussed Abdias do Nascimento. So she's saying that I'm just continuing the work that our ancestors did, over 150 years ago. Abdias do Nascimento. So the journalism I do is a journalism of Homem de Cor, again, man of color, mulatto, Abdias do Nascimento, who did anti-racist communication a long time ago. What I do is a continuation of what my ancestors did. And I hope to honor minimally this path that they have traced so that we can be here, reflects Thais Bernardes. So I just wanted to present this piece today because this is I have to say, of the things that I've seen change over these last 2 decades, the online presence of Black press has just radically changed the platform where, the mainstream media has to keep up with what Black websites are talking about, or they risk falling behind. Like Rede Global, which is the biggest television station in Brazil, they've increased the Black presence in their productions now. They've put more Black journalists out there. They've put Black people in the anchors' chairs. They're featuring more Black people, and not only that, Black stories, Black directors in some of their television productions. So this has been a radical change that's going on in Brazil's press over the last 2 decades. And I feel like I've personally seen it up close because I've covered this stuff for so long. So I just want, I'm curious to see, how you guys feel about this article, because I feel like some of the same stuff that I talked about in this article in reference to Black media in Brazil is something, we can still identify within the United States, because if we don't do it, who's going to do it? So with that said, I'm going to close the video here. Definitely drop a comment in the comment section. Want to know what you thought about today's video. Share this video, like this video, subscribe to the channel if you've seen more than a few videos that you found interesting. Smash the notification bell so that you be one of the first people to check out my new video when I put them up. And with that said, I'm going to close the video here and just request that you all come back and check out the next video that I do post.